Okay, we're up to part 3 and the final part of the lecture for week 2, and Max Weber is the subject.
So Max Weber was born into a Protestant, really quite well-off German family, very well connected and with financial security. His father was a successful lawyer and a politician, and his mother was an intellectual with a very strong interest in social welfare. He began his working life after he'd served in the army as an academic and having completed a PhD in economic history. He was a bit torn really between a political career following in his father's footsteps or having an intellectual career. He did teach. He didn't teach for very long, really. He got a position as a professor. He taught from 1891 until 1898, and then he had a psychological breakdown, and and it happened after his father died. And for for about 4 years, he was still on the payroll of the university, but he really did very little work until he got to the point that he was embarrassed about still getting paid, and he said that he couldn't continue that and asked to be taken off their payroll. They were amazingly generous. I have difficulty imagining a contemporary university being that generous. He didn't work very much at all for about 5 years because he was recovering. So he was in and out of sanitariums, having treatments, etc. He did, however, become an editor of a social science journal, and in 1904 he began traveling prior to that, but in 1904 he went to America and gave a lecture to the Congress of Arts and Sciences. So I tell you that because he did maintain some connection to the social sciences and to the field of sociology, but he wasn't working in a university until he was probably out of action really for almost 19 years in terms of working in a university. So in other words, he didn't have to combine the sorts of things that most of us do, where you combine running the university's administrative work with doing research, with doing teaching. He was actually, in a way, able to concentrate primarily on his research.
Before I go on, I want to talk about Max Weber's wife, Mary Ann Weber, and her dates are 1870 to 1954. Mary Ann and Max Weber were second cousins. Mary Ann's grandfather and Max's father were brothers. Mary Ann's mother had married a country doctor, but she died in childbirth during the second year of marriage. Mary Ann therefore grew up with her paternal grandmother, aunt, and 2 uncles. Her father visited occasionally, but did not live with his daughter. There was little money in the household, and her uncles and father had mental health problems. Mary Ann received only a basic education. Fortunately for Mary Ann, her grandfather, Karl Weber, agreed to send her to finishing school when she was 16. On her return, she lived with a maternal aunt, but moved to Berlin and in with Max Weber's family in 1892, by which time she was 22. Mary Ann married Max in 1893. During the early years of their marriage, while Max Weber was teaching in Berlin and at the University of Heidelberg, Mary Ann Weber studied with the German philosopher Heinrich Rickart and became involved in the first wave feminist movement. She published her first book in 1900. After Max Weber resigned his position in 1903 because of his ill health, the couple lived on credit until in 1908 Mary Ann inherited money and they could live comfortably. During Max's illness, Mary Ann continued with her own studies and attended political meetings. When she and Max travelled to the United States in 1904, she was inspired by Florence Kelley, an activist against sweatshops and for decent wages. With her analysis of marriage, called Wife and Mother in the Development of Law, which was published in 1907, Mary Ann Weber became an authority in the women's movement. Mary Ann and Max adopted 4 children after Max's sister killed herself in 1820. 3 months later, Max died. Mary Ann raised the children, devoted herself to the publication of Max's work, and wrote a biography of her husband, which was published in 1926.
The work that he has published and has become really famous for, he published in this period where he was not working within a university setting. So he had a number of essays published in 1904 and 1905, and they became The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And it's this book really which cemented his reputation as an intellectual. And what he argues in the book is that there is a connection between capitalism, or the capitalist system of production and exchange, so a connection between capitalism and religion. Very specifically, though, the Protestant branch of Christianity, which emerged after what is known as the Reformation, which was a schism or a split in Christianity, which led primarily to the West anyway, in the West anyway, to the Roman Catholic churches, and then a whole lot of Protestant churches, which include, from an Australian context, which includes the Anglican Church and the Uniting Church. So it's all a bit more complex than that, but just very broadly, there was this big split and there's this whole branch of Christianity called Protestantism, and he was very interested in that branch and America in particular, and how the religious ideas fed the capitalist ideas. So he connects this religious idea of a calling or a vocation, this thing where you think that this is really what you have to be doing in the world, and he connects that to the striving in Protestant circles. So many people say in a religious setting would have a feeling, a calling, sense of vocation for doing priestly type works. He reckons that in Protestant circles we had this sense of calling, but it was for work, for savings, investment, for entrepreneurial activity in the world. In other words, in the systematic creation of wealth. So he argues that achieving worldly success was evidence of John Calvin, who was a very important player in the beginning of Protestantism. So it was evidence of his theology of eternal salvation. So there was evidence in the world if you were successful. So self-denial, denying yourself, putting other people first, working hard, striving, that was all a religious duty, an obligation to make good of what was seen as God-given resources. And doing this in a systematic way, in an orderly way, Weber argues was all part of Protestant theology. The industrialization that he encountered, the idea of a market, the production of goods outside the home, this rational organization of labor to make it very efficient, keeping good records in order to make and calculate a profit, was all the creation of a whole system which he saw would transform traditional or feudal societies everywhere. So in other words, there was, or is, that's something that we can talk about, a strong connection between work and morality. So in this idea, work and wealth is good. So to illustrate Weber's ideas, what I'm going to do now is read a quote, and this is to benefit those who are just listening to the recording and not also viewing it as well. So it's a quotation from page 163 of The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, which was translated by very eminent American sociologist Talcott Parsons, whom you might not have come across because he is a bit out of favour. So it was published originally in 1958, but the edition that I've got is a 2003 one. So the quotation goes, "Wealth is thus bad ethically only insofar as it is a temptation to idleness and sinful enjoyment of life, and its acquisition is bad only when it is with the purpose of later living merrily and without care. But as a performance of duty in a calling, it is not only morally permissible, but actually enjoined. The parable of the servant who was rejected because he did not increase the talent which was entrusted to him seemed to say so directly. To wish to be poor was, it was often argued, the same as wishing to be unhealthy. It is objectionable as a glorification of works and derogatory to the glory of God. Especially begging on the part of one able to work is not only the sin of slothfulness, but a violation of the duty of brotherly love, according to the Apostle." So one of the problems with all of that, said Weber, is that whereas once hard work was a calling, so something that we felt with an inner drive, that it was something that we had to do, Now it is something we have to do, but the impulse is less internally than externally. So he has this metaphor of the iron cage. His thought is of being bound in a world of what he calls technical and economic conditions of machine production, which today, and I'm quoting here, which today determine the lives of all individuals who are born into this mechanism. So it's no longer a vocation. Now it is that we have to do it because we're compelled to do it from the external world. So he goes on to say that material goods have gained an increasing and finally an inexorable power over the lives of men, and he was saying men, as at no particular period in history. Not that he was talking about today, he was talking about 100 years ago, but to me there's something quite prophetic in what he says, that this increasing power of material goods over people's lives. So think about that in context of consumer culture. So his idea of disenchantment is that because of the rise and spread of capitalism, and in a world where the rational thinking of science is valued over religion and mysticism, what's been lost is a sense of the world as a great enchanted garden. And for him, this is a problem. Another one of the ideas that Weber had, and for which he is very well known, is he established this idea of ideal types. But when he's talking about an ideal type, and you can use this in many different areas, he's really, it's only in the abstract does everything work as precisely as he sets out. So bear that in mind.
One of the most important aspects of Weber's work was his analysis of authority, or what he calls legitimate domination. And he's got a three-part typology to analyse different configurations of power. The first of these is what he calls legal rational, or a bureaucracy. He wrote that the principal features of bureaucracy are, number one, a rigid and clear division of labour. Tasks are clear, think of a job description. Tasks are clear for each part of the system. Number two, there's lots of regulations, a very clear chain of command, ways to get people to do what they're told. Think of performance reviews, KPIs. And three, people are hired who have particular skills and qualifications to carry out the tasks. Within a bureaucracy, you find the following: hierarchy, specialised jobs, merit-based recruitment, which often, but not always, is based on an open competition, that is, anyone can apply. Number four, a clear system of hiring, promotion, transfer and firing. 5, staff have to obey the rules, and there's a standard of conduct that is required, which is called being professional. And number 6, an impersonality of office. So any qualified person can be the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Adelaide, for example, but the authority is in the position, not the person. So when the Vice-Chancellor goes, they no longer have the authority. They will have some ongoing kudos for having done that job.
According to Weber, traditional authority or traditional domination is leadership in which authority is then tied to customs or traditions. So, for example, patriarchs and their families, or in the case of the British monarch, a matriarch and a family. So it's tied to this idea of family, where the master rules over the household, where the offspring inherit the position of authority and all of the other goodies. So people obey a traditional authority because they believe it's their duty to do so, often in the past sanctioned by religion, for example, the idea of the divine rights of kings. And then charismatic leadership is the third, as I said, in Weber's topology. So this type of authority lies in the charisma or the personality of the leader, and usually there's some commitment to a cause, such as the end of apartheid in South Africa. So the definition of charisma, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is a personal magic of leadership, arousing special popular loyalty or enthusiasm for a public figure, a political leader such as Nelson Mandela. Or another meaning of that is a special magnetic charm or appeal, such as that of a popular actor who might have a very large fan base. I just wanted to finish up by mentioning this idea of interpretivism. It'll probably come up, or has already come up, when you've done social research. So Weber was very interested in qualitative research methods. He didn't just want to count, for example, the number of people who go to football. He also wanted to understand why people go to the football. So the meanings that people give to their lives, their feelings, their motives for doing things. And that's a very important part. You will have all done probably social research. A very important part of contemporary research is to understand why people do what it is that they do. So just in summary, yes, I would like to say, first of all, that it was possible for Weber to become a significant figure in sociology, widely regarded as one of the three founders, as I've said, even though he didn't work in a university for a long period of time. But it was his writings that were really important, and his ideas that continue to resonate today, because the world he described is in some ways, and it's worth discussing, is in some ways similar to 100 years ago. And I also just wanted to mention as well his endorsement of micro-level qualitative research to understanding how people understand their lives. Thank you for listening.